Your conference is being recorded. The leader has muted your line. To unmute your line, press #6. The leader has muted your line. To unmute your line, press #6.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Joe Kundal with the Cornerstone Group. Today's Lunch and Learn webinar is going to focus on interpreting and communicating PI patterns. What we'd like to do for the next 15 minutes or so is keep everyone in mute mode, and we will open up the lines toward the end for question and answer. Wanted to start today with what to expect on today's call in terms of what topics we'll be covering. First, we want to revisit factor combinations, which we think are the key ingredient in being able to make heads and tails of PI patterns and then make them actionable for the people that you're working with. Next, we want to establish a baseline for what is our primary goal when communicating PI results. What should we set out to achieve, and how do we get there? The next thing we want to talk about is how do I translate PI language into practical language? We really want to take a dive into how do we convert what PI is telling us and what we know about PI into something that we can communicate again in a practical way to stakeholders in the process. And then lastly, how and in what manner should we be communicating what we learn about other people via PI to other people? We're going to start today, as I mentioned, taking a dive into each of the 6 key factor combinations that PI gives us. And just a quick refresher on what I mean when I say factor combination. We're looking at factors that sit on opposite sides of the midpoint, so one factor being higher than average, the other factor being lower than average. We're going to start today with the dominance and extroversion factor, the A factor being high and the B factor being low. When we have high dominance, factor A, and low extroversion, factor B, we are talking about someone who tends to be very analytical, very technical in their orientation. They tend to trust themselves more than they trust others. They also tend to be really authoritative in their leadership style, and sometimes they can struggle with delegating authority in details. On the flip side, when someone is high in extroversion and low in dominance, so high B, low A, we're talking about someone who's very social in their orientation. They trust others. They're really enthusiastic and persuasive in the way they communicate. They get a lot of confidence from collaboration, and they tend to delegate more easily to other folks in the process, again, because they trust other people rather quickly. So again, that's a run through on dominance and extroversion. Next up, we are going to run through the A and C factor combination, dominance and patience. When we're talking about folks that are high A and low C, high dominance and low patience, we're talking about folks that are going to be really proactive, results focused. They tend to have a really positive response to pressure. They tend to be an agent of change and have a really positive response to changing environments. They also struggle to listen, and again, this is something key to know. It's not meant to be in a disingenuous fashion. It just happens to be that folks that are high A, low C find it a little harder to focus on one thing for a long period of time, so listening can be a struggle. On the flip side, folks that are high C, high patience, low A, low dominance, tend to be much more responsive and steady in the way that they approach their work. They tend to have a more negative response to pressure. They don't deal with it quite as well, particularly pressure for time. Everything for folks that are high C and low A is really about having processing time, and they need processing time in particular to adapt to anything that's going to change in their process and their environment. They also tend to be really strong listeners on the converse to folks that are built the other way. So again, this is the A and C factor combo, dominance and patience. Next up, we have the A-D factor combination, dominance and formality. Folks that are high in dominance, A, low in formality, D, tend to really look at everything in their world from the lens of risk equals opportunity. They come across as very confident decision makers. They're focused on the big picture, and they're really comfortable in undefined space. Folks that are high D, formality, low A, dominance, tend to look at the world in the complete opposite way, in that they want to eliminate all the risks that they can from any situation that they have to work through. For them, decision-making is challenging unless they're in their area of expertise. That's where they tend to be more confident in their decision-making. They also tend to look at the world in a more narrow picture way, meaning they're looking at exactly what's in front of them in a really concrete way and are very focused on that one thing. And one thing that folks that are high in formality, low in dominance need more than anything is clarity around the work that you're asking them to do. So again, that was dominance and formality as a factor combination. Next up, we have extroversion, factor B, and patience, factor C. When you have folks that are high in extroversion and low in patience, you tend to see folks that are really quick to connect. They motivate and persuade others as a means of getting things done, and their communication style tends to be very lively and expressive. On the flip side to that, when you're working with folks that are high in patience and low in extroversion, they tend to be what we call trust but verified. Over time, they will develop trust with those they're working with and those around them. However, again, being high in patience, that takes time for them. Processing time really drives how they participate in groups and how they share in group situations. So think about this from the lens of collaboration, right? They will collaborate, but they have to develop that trust first, and that's going to take some time. So that is extraversion and patience. We only have two more here. Next up is extraversion and formality, so the B drive and the D drive. Folks that are high in extraversion and low in formality tend to be really uninhibited by the traditional way of doing things. They tend to share things at a high level. Often those ideas can come across as half-baked because the details aren't as important to them, and they tend to delegate very freely. On the flip side, folks that are high in formality, low in extraversion, so high D, low B, are very careful about what they share, when they share it, and who they share it with. Ideas are fully formed when they share them. Everything is really buttoned up and thorough and well thought out. And for them, delegation tends to be more of a challenge because that comes with trust and oftentimes also comes with time to develop that trust. So again, that is extraversion factor B and formality factor D. Last but not least, we have the C and D factor combination, patience and formality. The C-D factor combo is about rules and follow-through. Folks that are high C, low D tend to be really casual with rules, a little more loose with deadlines, and their work may lack structure and sometimes completion. They tend to really persist over long periods of time, but often at the expense of the details. Folks that are high D, high in formality, and low C, low in patience, tend to be very careful and precise with the rules. They tend to be really strict and punctual when it comes to working on deadlines. And for them, they tend to put a really heavy emphasis on the accuracy and precision with which they complete their tasks. So again, that was a quick run through on patience and formality. So now that we've run through each of the 6 factor combos, which again for some of you is going to be a retread and for others it's going to be new to you, next we want to talk about how do we take these factor combinations and distill them down in terms of importance. So from a best practices standpoint, when you are either preparing to give someone feedback on their pattern or simply interpret what their pattern is telling you, you want to set the objective of learn 2 things. How do you learn 2 things? Well, if you think about it from the lens of this funnel I have here, you want to start with the widest factor combination because that's what's going to tell you the most about the person and how they approach their work. So in the case of this person, that would be the high D and the low D. Again, the widest factor combination. And we just went through what we learn about that person. Then we want to go to the second widest factor combo. If you can target the 2 widest factor combinations about a person's PI pattern, you're going to learn more from those 2 things in terms of how they approach their work than you're going to learn really anywhere else. So from a best practices standpoint, this is a really good way to sort of prepare yourself to interpret a pattern, to set it up for you, to start to think about what do I need to know about working with this person, and then also what do I need to share with others when it comes to working with this person. The next thing we want to do after we figure out what are the 2 widest factor combinations and what does that tell us is how do I take this PI terminology that I've learned and connect it to the work that that person is doing. And this is where taking a nuanced approach can really be helpful. If you know someone's in a sales role or you know someone's in an operational role or someone's in a technical role of some sort, you want to translate through the lens of the work that that person, again, is going to be doing or is going to be asked to do. So when you're converting the PI terminology to the practical terminology, it's really important, again, to have that baseline of the type of work they're doing. In this case, we have a traditional sales, persuasive type of pattern. What PI tells us is this is a quick connector, results focused, competitive, and good with follow-through. But how do I turn that into something that's meaningful for those they're working with? Well, if I'm talking about a salesperson, I may translate that into something like, this person motivates others to achieve results. They build relationships very quickly if I put them in a social sales setting. They're driven to drive results and exceed their sales quota to really bring out the competitive part and bring that to life. And lastly, well, if I know they're good with follow-through, I may say something like, this person's really disciplined in the sales process and how they execute it. Again, I want to tie what I learn about them through PI to the work that they do. So even if I shared two things on this list, again, going back to those PI terms, let's just say I wanted to share that they're a quick connector and they follow through well. I want to craft those two sentences around the work that they're doing to really bring it to life. We also have to keep in mind that PI does not tell the whole story about who this person is and what they bring to the table. A lot of you have heard us talk about the head, the heart, and the briefcase as a concept for thinking about where PI fits into the process. And things like the heart, right, the values, can I trust this person? Are they a good person that I want to bring onto my team? In the briefcase, right, what skills and experience does this person bring to the table? What particular subject matter expertise have they acquired over time? Those things really complement what PI tells us, which is native behaviors and general learning velocity, again, for those of you that are using the cognitive tool as well. So when you when you round this out, right, and when you factor in what PI is telling you, it's a piece to the puzzle, but it doesn't tell you the whole thing. So it's just important to keep that in the back of your mind as you begin to interpret patterns and share feedback. When we're communicating to stakeholders, we want to have a purpose for what we're communicating. When we start with selection, we're generally communicating that we've been disciplined in the selection process. These are data points that are the pieces to a bigger puzzle. And what we've learned about the candidate is how fast do they learn and how are they built to approach their work. When we're communicating to managers and other folks that are stakeholders in this person's success, we want to use predictive index to build really good expectations. So we can share things like, what level of fit is this employee to the job we're going to be asking them to do? If they're really high fit behaviorally, maybe we don't need to share so much about their behavioral profile other than they're generally high fit. But if there are some gaps that we know exist, we want to know where this person should thrive and where they're going to need our support. And if we can build a good baseline for what we share and build a good process for how we share it, we're going to be able to use PI in a really meaningful way inside the organization and really make it a piece of the fabric of our language as we think about things like organizational development, individual employee development, et cetera. So that brings us to the end of today's information session. Just as a quick reminder, we have a tremendous amount of training resources with Cornerstone. Our next Lunch and Learn to continue and build on the series we've been running will launch on February 22nd. We have ongoing PI practitioner training, either in closed workshops for your organization or open workshops with other organizations. And we will have these Lunch and Learns available on demand to share with your teams. We also have resources in-house for you to continuously access. A lot of you are familiar with Larissa Haynes and the Client Success Team at Cornerstone. We would encourage you to continue to reach out to us with any questions that you have. And the Catalyst series, which exists as part of Predictive Index's community for analysts and other stakeholders in the process, continues to provide our clients with a great resource. Two that we want to reference in particular, one on understanding reference patterns more acutely, and two on around behavioral interviewing questions to really help strengthen your interview process. With that, I'm going to wrap things up on the info session and open up the lines for question and answer. And again, really appreciate everyone's time today.